Well, hi, everybody. We are well into our 12-hour marathon virtual event. We've been across the continents looking at a wide range of topics, markets. We thought this might be a good time to reflect for a moment on where we've been, where we're going, and what we hope to get out of not just this summit, but COP29, which is right around the corner, and Climate Week NYC, which just ended a few weeks ago in New York. So I've invited two special guests to join us today and spend a few moments thinking about the progress we've made and the progress yet to go. So let me introduce them. First, Doug McKeige. Doug is senior counsel of the Environmental Integrity Project, where he works on systemic air and water pollution impacting people across Texas and Louisiana. He's also the editor-in-chief of The Climate Capitalist, and he's written and published hundreds of articles covering a broad scope of financial and economic issues surrounding climate change. Former managing partner and shareholder litigation from Bernstein, Lidwitz, Berger, and Grossman, Doug was instrumental in the growth of that firm. He spent the last decade in hedge fund and commercial real estate. He's a member, this is important, of the Earth Justice Council and a distinguished fellow at Tulane Center for Environmental Law, earned his BA with honors from Tufts, and went to law school at Tulane, where he was a member of the Law Review, and he is a member of the New York Bar. How's that?
Thanks, Robin.
I didn't even know all that about Doug, who I know quite
like
well.
it just gets better and better. And David Kirkpatrick, I will introduce as a longtime friend, the best editor I ever had. He's a technology journalist, an author, an organizer of technology-oriented conferences. His work now is primarily focused on explaining the role of technology in responding to climate emergency. And he's the senior editor at Climate Capitalist. And David's probably best known for writing one of the first and seminal books to this
The
day,
first.
called The Facebook Effect, the inside story of the company that is connecting the world. It was a very early look and a very prescient look at what would happen to that company. David's written, you name
Not
it,
prescient enough.
Fortune magazine, Forbes, Information, Time, Vanity Fair, and others. He created Techonomy, which is a tech-centric look at the economy, both a website and a conference. And he's a passionate and studied environmentalist. And so we're going to engage David and Doug, since they work together, but probably share some ideas in common and some very different ideas. So let's start by reflecting way back. And I can, not way back, but the pandemic. So the pandemic shut the world down. And what we saw was a change in climate. We saw pollution levels drop. We saw the skies clear. We saw the air clear. We saw animal life that hadn't been around for a while come back. Was that a catalyst for what the trajectory that we're going towards now? Did that mean anything to you guys personally?
So
David?
why don't you take that?
Well, I'd gotten going into climate before the pandemic hit, and like most Americans, had been looking at headlines, conflicting headlines on climate, and ultimately said, okay, like if I can't figure it out, then who among me could figure it out if I have the time and the energy and enough background. So I spent some time going back to law school to take classes, but more important, just doing my own reading and kind of going like, oh my God, the atmosphere is only 7 miles thick. That matters. We know how much CO2 is in it. We know how fast we're adding it. We know how much fossil fuels we're burning. We know we're going to double greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, in 20 or 30 years from now. And so it became just a very obvious thing for me. And so I started to do the newsletter. I think the pandemic showed us that one way to reduce emissions is to have a global recession.
That's right.
We had, and so there was a lesson in that, which people don't want to sacrifice today and have another recession to save the planet. So we have to figure out to have economic growth alongside of solving the climate crisis. So
I'm not as convinced that the pandemic was a very big deal for climate. Maybe it gave people a chance to sit around thinking harder about the meaning of their life, and some changed the direction of their life. And that's good. Maybe that happened a little bit to me even. But I just saw a statistic. I think fossil fuel consumption dropped less than 10% during the pandemic. So even though we had a lot less local air pollution because people weren't driving and things like that, it really, we don't want to solve the planetary crisis by reducing economic activity that much. I think, as Doug points out, a recession is not the answer to
No, but
climate.
it really did show us the effects of what we do. To me, it just made it so crystal clear that
Yeah.
there is an effect to what we do every day. And when
Good
we
point.
stop doing it, and so let's move on past the pandemic. You were both at Climate Week NYC. There were 1,000 online and in-person events. Give me your impression. Did things get done? Is it these little incremental things that happened at each meeting? Were there themes that ran throughout the week? Like, what makes you hopeful that things like Climate Week NYC are moving in the right direction?
Well, I'm not that hopeful that something like Climate Week makes that big of a difference myself, sadly. And I'll let Doug answer too. But my impression, and I went to a number of events. Doug and I were trying to meet up, and there's so many things going on that we didn't even ever see each other during Climate Week. But one thing that I picked up was anger among the experts, that it's just moving too slowly, and people who really know what's going on are getting more and more frustrated, even outraged. And I picked that up in meeting after meeting. It was sort of an undertone, but it was a genuine undertone. I mean, it is so egregious how far behind the world is in taking appropriate action on the climate crisis. And Climate Week was a gathering of about 100,000 people who spent most of their time thinking about this. And they all, for the most part, realize we are in deep, deep trouble and we're not reacting accordingly. So to me, that was the primary takeaway.
Well put, David. So, a couple of years ago, the general theme was, are the corporates, and Climate Week is a large corporate type event. And I went to the formal, actual Climate Week event that the Climate Group puts on. And the corporates, and going back 3-4 years ago, all said, okay, we're going to make these net zero pledges. And even the most progressive companies like a Microsoft or Amazon, maybe so that by 2030 that they would have 30 or 40% reduction in their footprint, and they're not even they're actually not going even down yet, and we're 5 years away, and they're still going up because the cloud computing and AI is driving demand for their and they can't put enough, for some reason they can't get enough renewable online, whether it's solar, wind, or batteries, et cetera, to even swallow up incremental power demand. And then when you start broadening out to other companies, I was a securities litigation lawyer, and we could sue companies when they made misstatements of fact. And people think, just because companies make pledges that if they don't meet them, that ends up meaning something, but it doesn't. They can be like real promises, and there are some companies I'm sure that are, executing and doing a really good job and getting where they want to go. But most companies are now, we promised, but guess what? We're not going to succeed at that rate. And I thought that was a big theme across Climate Week that we saw.
Yeah.
And but I do think that these conferences are valuable because to the extent, and there is a huge movement still, partly based on the IRA, partly based on what the Europeans are doing, which they have some very strong and maybe equivalent or more powerful policies they've put in place to drive change. And so there's a lot happening. I mean, there are just a gazillion people in town, well dressed, presentable, carrying cards with the names of companies and things that they're doing, and they are meeting and they are talking and they are determined. And I do believe that there's increasing population of people who have woken up and care and have finally said, oh, the science is pretty simple. It's a big problem, and I'm going to be an idiot if I wake up in, a couple of years and my kids look at me and say, what the heck were you doing, Dad? So that I think, sort of how I saw Climate Week.
And I think what you're seeing is innovation across the board on so many different fronts. Did you sense that there was some optimism of the tech innovation? David, in your case, I know you follow it so closely. Are we getting?
Well, yes. I mean, I would, in general, to the question you're asking, is there general excitement about the pace of action and progress in climate tech? I think there is. There is on my part. In fact, it's my one source of hope about the entire picture because I don't see governments taking sufficient action. I don't see corporates in general, as Doug points out, moving quickly enough, although I think many of them do want to move quickly. But I see some possibilities in several key areas of dramatic improvements in climate tech, both in terms of its capabilities and its cost. And all you have to do is look at the extraordinary transformation of solar that's happened over the last 15 or 20 years to see what's possible. And there are people, and that's happening also in wind. It's happening. In fact, they say the technology progress is happening faster now in batteries even than it did in solar. Now, we have the Chinese to thank for almost all of that so far. So, bad-mouthing China is not my métier when it comes to climate. They have done amazing things for the world in terms of their commitment toward climate tech. But even something like fusion, which, they say it's always 10 or 15 years off, but in fact, there's more and more belief that we are getting close to being able to produce fusion power, and that by the mid-2030s, we may actually be able to do it commercially at some scale. Now, that's a long way off. We will have burned past our climate goals by then, but it does propose the possibility that we can do some great things. And I think in a number of other arenas, you can make similar points.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, we've talked about steel, we've talked about cement, that there's some real in materials, mining, there's some real technological advances. I come out of the tech industry, software is so much easier. Hardware takes a long time. We had the IRA, we're all, 2022? The IRA was signed in the US. Trillions of dollars have been spent, but progress is slow and hard to measure. New jobs creation, clean industries. But are you guys still, I know we were very hopeful when IRA came out, even if it was the worst name in the world for a program. Are we seeing the fruits of that, those investments?
Take that. So was advertised as costing the federal government roughly $300 billion over 10 years or $30 billion a year in 10 years. It looks like it's going to cost the government quite a bit more, but that means you have a multiplier on that spend that could be, multiples of that. And that's great. And the story is that, the US, there's a dichotomy between China and the US. The US does venture and early stage and mid stage technology very well, whereas the Chinese do late stage technology and big picture, industries. And so it is extremely exciting what China is actually doing on solar, wind batteries, and cars. Today, China, and there's issues around slave labor. I'm not an expert on that, but they're making panels at 10 cents a watt. So a normal solar panel is 350 watts. That means a solar panel is $35. You want to put 10 of them on the roof. The cost of the panel itself in China is like $35 a piece. That's $350 to put 10 panels. Now, of course, you got to rack it. You got to do inverters. You got to connect it to the grid. But they're doing. China runs on roughly 240 gigawatts of power. That's what their base load is, and they're adding 250 gigawatts of solar and wind in 2024. They're adding 50 of coal at the same time, but you need base load when it's not sunny and windy. So, they find that, solar and wind is far more beneficial for them than burning coal. And their cost, this really striking thing that, is amazing is the cost of an electric vehicle in China is now something like 40% less than a comparable
Yeah.
internal combustion vehicle in the US. So in the US, you want to go buy a Toyota Camry for $35,000. If you're in China, dollar equivalent, it's less than 20 for the same car and probably a better car.
Electric. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And it's
China's up to 50%
Ah,
plug-in. That doesn't mean they're all pure battery, but that's the most recent headline out of China. And all of a sudden, places in China that used to be air pollution starting to have clean air, which is, nobody ever thought that would happen.
Yeah, so
No,
what
it's
Doug's saying
amazing.
is that in effect, China has had a series of IRAs over a number of years, and ever since probably they really started changing their 5-year plans to be focused on competing and winning in climate tech.
Yeah,
They've done. But I want to just quickly say the IRA is a historic measure that is deeply important. It's had a major effect in catalyzing other countries to take comparable steps, including Europe. The IRA is durable enough that even if Trump were reelected, which I'm certainly not counting on or hoping for, most of it would probably survive. The EV portions, the EV subsidies probably would be in jeopardy, but there's been a very politically savvy deployment of IRA money across the country, and
yeah,
a majority of it is being spent in red districts, and the people in those districts are benefiting, and the Congress people know it,
yeah,
and that's a good thing.
yeah.
So Biden gets enormous credit for the IRA. It was one of the biggest pieces of legislation in
No,
American
agreed.
history. It's comparable in some ways to elements of the New Deal, and it is radically improving America's climate response. Not enough,
Agreed.
but radically
Agreed.
improving.
Right.
But to go back to Doug,
It's important to put it in context, though. If it's 300 billion, and let's say it's 100 billion a year, the U.S. government spending on an annual basis is 6 trillion out of a $24 trillion economy, and the defense budget is 800 billion a year. So 300, if it's 100 a year, is really very small relative to total federal spending. And yet, and so just in contrast, we've got, Bezos, Gates, and Buffett, who each claim to be worth $100 billion apiece. And so
yeah,
I'm the last
yeah,
guy to come around and say, oh, we have to have a wealth tax. But our country is very wealthy, the United States. We have roughly 150 trillion of personal net worth. We have 350 million people. The average American is worth 500 grand balance sheet. You take their homes and their investments, subtract the more their house. We have enormous wealth in the country. We don't want to touch wealth particularly, but it's there. So, when you think about the ability of the federal government to spend, it's a good reference point is wealth of the country, and what can we afford? And we could afford to do a lot more in terms of incentives. I also, you're going to ask a little bit about voluntary carbon credits. Ultimately, you have to use sticks along with carrots. Politically, using the sticks in terms of a carbon tax or something like that, even on a business to business basis, and leaving the consumer out of it, is ultimately going to be essential. And so these policies at the corporates who say, hey, I'm not going to do much on making my footprint smaller and having a lower carbon budget. I'm quite confident that we're going to see a moment in time, sooner than later, where the cost of their carbon gets charged to them, and we're going to charge imports accordingly to make sure that we don't disadvantage our companies and our economy relative to the rest of the world.
No, we're going to do the latter thing first, because border adjustment mechanisms are the best way the world is currently moving towards a carbon tax, led as often by Europe. But I want to make a big point about what we can afford. Doug's right, and I love everything you just said, Doug. Everyone, I mean, there's a universal agreement among knowledgeable people that a carbon tax would be the single best move that the world or our country, any geography, can make to push toward effective climate action. But even the most aggressive estimates of how much it would cost to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accords and keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees, even with a little bit of overshoot, are at most 5 trillion a year globally, which is a lot of money. But Doug's better at stats than me, but I believe the global economy is 35 trillion right now, something like that. Is that right, Doug? What is the word global economy?
The global economy is 100 and
Okay, so there you go.
US.
It was a better point than I
triple
thought
that.
because I'm not good at economic statistics.
Right.
But okay, if the global economy is over 100 trillion and the most aggressive, ambitious spending plans to, if we were to do pretty much everything we need to do, is no more than 5 trillion globally annually. That is absolutely affordable. It's simply a matter of priorities. And in a global event like this wonderful one you're running, Robin, it's important to emphasize the world can do this. It's just choosing not to.
Yeah. And to go back to Doug's point about China, I was just in Latin America. They're all driving Chinese EVs there. Like,
oh, really?
We are,
Wow.
we are, I mean, China has not just done great things in China, but they are taking over the world market, especially in EVs and solar. And that that will, again, we don't want to get into
And
the
that's
election.
and Robin, that's what's sad about the fact that we in the US have not had good policy, because ultimately our automakers are profitable, partly because of the US market that we can protect, and we along with the Europeans are going to are enacting like 100% tariffs on Chinese vehicles, which means they won't come here because they're going to cost twice as much.
Right.
But we do rely our automakers on sales into the entire world, and so you're out. They're toast in China at this point. They're toast in Asia. They're toast in South America, Latin America, and Africa. Whether they can continue to have a decent business in Europe, given the fact that Europeans are putting the same tariff on China that we are and discouraging them. But here we go. We've lost this industry. We're going to lose this industry. These companies are not going to be able to compete. And I continue to hear people tell me, "Oh, the EVs aren't that good, and there's a crossover that takes so long before the carbon footprint of the vehicle because it's more carbon, to make it than an ICE vehicle." They're just superior vehicles. They don't make noise. They're quiet. And they're just
They get
delightful.
smarter. Yeah, no, there's lots of
And so we're going to lose, the U.S. The vehicle makers are going to suffer. The unions are going to suffer, and I'm just really sad about that. I want to, like making cars in America, man. That's what we do. That's fun. That's good.
I completely agree with Doug on that, by the way, that I think these 100% tariffs probably are a mistake because they're protecting American automakers from having to compete with cars that are successfully competing already on a global scale.
Yep.
So we will lose our global market share very rapidly if we act as if we can just somehow hold our arms and keep Chinese EVs out. And by the way, on quality, the quality of Chinese cars is superb. It's in general higher than the quality of American vehicles. And even the inexpensive ones, and they go for as little as $10,000 from BYD's Seagull model, it's a high quality $10,000 car.
Yeah, no, and then there's the whole developing world. What I love about you guys, and I love this climate capitalist, I think I'm going to say phase one, we all voluntarily kind of agreed to do the right thing because it was the right thing to do. Didn't work out so well. And now I think the message, at least Climate Week, what I hear, there is money to be made by doing the right thing, that this is a new economy, going back to the IRA, going back to the policies that every government is putting in place. There is money to be made for all of us, new jobs, by being clean, by moving into clean, green economies and moving towards net zero. And that's what I love about what you guys are doing, because it's that you can't depend on human nature just to do the right thing. And so there has to be an upside for them. So we have so many. So I love this capitalistic based sustainability. And I think it's going to be important at COP as well, right?
Well, first of all, Agree with what you just said, Robin. The central thesis of my journalism right now is that there is going to be a climate economy that is going to be the central driver of the global economy. If that's not true, we're all in deep, deep trouble. But I believe it really is possible. I think it's going to be driven by technological innovation. Eventually, it'll be driven by government action. Hopefully, it'll be driven by a carbon tax. But it's going to happen because, as the events of yesterday and hitting, the Hurricane Milton just underscores, things are getting worse. They're getting worse fast, and people are figuring it out. And it's got to hit them apparently really hard on the head for them to do the right thing. But eventually, they will. But in terms of capitalism, this will be a profitable industry, a hugely profitable. It already is. And many of the biggest money managers in the world are already positioning themselves for that reality.
Yeah, the money managers. Talk to me about the energy companies too, like the traditional, the Exxons. Are they moving towards greener? They talk a good story. Are we seeing?
They don't even
action?
talk a very good story when you look in and see what the talk is. It's not a very, so I did litigation against public companies as part of my career, and so I didn't go into it, with a negative view, but watching and seeing how they talk about what they do and so on, and the end of the day, capitalism is about earning a return on capital, and most, a major, whether it's 2/3, I don't know the amount of the value of public companies versus private companies in the US, but the public companies dominate. And if you're a CEO of a public company, your job, your goal is to increase earnings per share on a regular basis, drive the stock price up, because your goal is to have your liquidity event in 5 to 10 years when your stint as the CEO ends, and have a liquidity event and be able to claim, that you're worth, or know that you're worth, tens of millions of dollars, if not more. That's the ambition. That's what drives capitalism to a great extent. The public companies run by their CEOs, and earnings per share on a quarterly basis make a very big difference to them. So I see that. I've joined an outfit called the Environmental Integrity Project to sort of really get my hands, dirty and at work in the real world. And so whether it's Coke or Exxon, Chevron, INEOS, you name it, they're running big, huge petrochemical plants, refineries, and so on. The Gulf Coast is the industrial hub of America, and in fact, the hub of all the future infrastructure, all the big companies, ammonia, carbon capture, and so on, under the IRA. And these companies are running facilities that are 50 or 100 years old, and they blow through their clean air permits and pollute, both with real toxic and serious pollutants, and in lockstep with that are doing greenhouse gas pollution. But the regulators in Louisiana, Texas, and other places are co-opted by the oil and gas industry, and so they haven't seen a clean air permit that they don't want to grant, and they haven't seen violations, which they see day in and day out, of permits putting bad stuff in the air for people who live in, and not just the fence line people, but people across Houston and Dallas and San Antonio who suffer with air pollution, the kind that, we used to see in China. That's going up now in these places, not going down. And they want to, and they need, and want to add, but the CEO of Exxon says, I don't want to do $1 billion upgrade of my Baytown facility just outside of Houston, because I don't have to, because the regulator isn't making me do it. So
I know. And that existing versus new infrastructure is going to be a big topic as we go further, because we've got to get more efficiency out of the old systems. And you guys have done a fabulous.
Could I just say one thing? I love Doug's holding their feet to the fire. Before we wrap, I just want to invite everyone to go to theclimatecapitalist.com and subscribe to our free newsletter. Everything there is free, even though it's called the Climate Capitalist. So we'd love to have more readers.
Two reasons to be hopeful. Doug? One reason to be hopeful.
Reasons. I think good ultimately wins out over evil.
There you go. David?
I have hope. I think technology progress and the eventual awareness of the world will drive us in the right direction. Too late, sadly, but we will make much more progress than most people think.
And I just want QuickBooks for carbon reporting. I mean, like, this shouldn't be rocket science.
That's coming.
Right.
That is coming, and AI is going to help make it happen faster.
That's right. Thank you so much for giving us some perspective. We will see you throughout the program. Climate Capitalist, everybody, thank you again for being with us.